Great. Okay. So welcome everybody to this second session introducing our edited volume, Emerging Auto Industries in a World of Global Value Chains. We will not, yesterday we had a very kind and comprehensive introduction to the contents and contribution of the volume by Tommaso. That helped us framing it within our own GRP's experience, where Martin and I have specifically focused on the patterns of industrialization and development of auto industries based in developing regions, emerging economies, and in particular in the global south. This volume is an outcome of years of collaboration in this direction and gathers many colleagues and friends that are also part of the GRPISA network. So once again, let me thank GRPISA for allowing all this. What I'm going to do today is just give you a brief introduction for those who were not present yesterday. Obviously, thank you very much to those who could bear with us for 2 sessions in a row and that attended yesterday as well. So I'll give you just a little flavor of how the book is structured. But to introduce in a straightforward way what we'll be covering today. So this book, for those who haven't heard us before, aims at providing gathering different theoretical concepts and approaches that speak to the industrialization path of those today that aim to industrialize by focusing on their auto industry within a context of global production shaped by global value chains. And we aim, and what we did is also to collect many different country cases that show the possible varieties of integration within global value chains and different development paths. So yesterday we had the first session introduced by the contribution given by Professor Peter Pavlinek that is present with us today, that offered his own exemplification and his own structure of typologies that today can be traced in the current division of the global auto industries in terms of autonomous peripheries, integrated peripheries, and I'm sorry, need to drink, and macro regional peripheries. And based on the contribution on the typologies illustrated by Professor Pavlinek, we also discussed 2 specific cases, Poland in terms of Eastern European region, and India yesterday, discussing in particular the possibilities and the patterns of development, of industrial development within integrated or autonomous region like India. What we do today is focusing on another core topic that crosses the volume, that is the need to rethink industrial policy within a context of global value chains, and the following need, the related need to reformulate what we call development strategies for the auto industry. We do so by introducing 2 of the theoretical chapters that we have in the volume, one that we co-wrote, that Martin Schroeder, my co-editor, and I co-wrote on reformulating industrial policy, and another that Martin co-authored with Kaoru Natsuda and the late John Thorburn on development strategies. We merged these two to introduce 3 country cases, namely Argentina, illustrated by Bruno Perez Almansi from University of Venice, Foscari, by Tobias Wuttke, that is my co-author on the South African case, but that also worked with Bruno on other occasions on comparing Argentina, South Africa, and Thailand. And we have Alexandre de Potesta Gomes that will follow on the Chinese case. We will then open the floor for a Q&A. I'm sure there will be many comments and questions. I leave it here. I thank you very much. I will continue speaking, but we are now shifting onto another presentation. Thank you very much. And Martin, I let you share your screen. Okay. Maybe you can go back. No, but okay, I can start from here. Next. Okay. So to give you a context, I will frame the discussion in terms of where we start by locating the current situation of the global auto industry, where developing countries and emerging industries have increased their share in the global automobile industry, both as producers and consumers. So our work for years has been focused on tracing this trajectory. We start from the observation that obviously, while global value chains are the dominant form structuring global production, the paths followed and the development outcomes are certainly mixed. And we also start from the observation that led Martin and his co-authors, but that triggered a collective discussion on the observation that only few countries within the global sphere have actually managed to sustain and promote and establish domestic automobile producers. So this is the observation. The research question that represents our base. On the top of this picture, Martin, next, please. I don't see it moving. Yes, okay. So we build some interconnected debate. One is the need to reformulate industrial policies in a space of global value chains. The second is the connected need to rethink the specific development strategies aimed at promoting an auto industry for those countries that still bet on the auto industry as a pulling sector for industrialization. Obviously, we build on the conceptualization of the inadequacy of the old dichotomy between import substituting and export-oriented industrialization, observing how these categories have a weak fit within the challenges that emerging regions and industrializing countries face today. we start from the assumption and the analysis of how the policy space available to developing regions has decreased over time, leading to a more limited range of policy tools. We also try to contribute to the debate on the need to rethink industrial strategies, industrial policies in a global value chain space. That means not only assessing the industrial policy tools available to developing countries, but also questioning the actors that can enable industrial policy beyond the centrality of the state. The Chinese case illustrated in the book is very telling. And the governance mechanisms that can best promote auto-industrialization. One common thread within the book is the tension that also Tommaso highlighted yesterday in his introduction, the tension between the obvious need of newly industrialized regions to still build an integrated industry, and how this combines with the contrasting need to specialize to fit the global value chains division of tasks. So how do we solve this tension, and how do countries, if they do solve this tension? Obviously, we highlight some of the challenges that the current auto-industrializers, so late auto-industrializers, face or faced so far, but the situation is continuously evolving, whereby we observe how some countries, where newly industrializing countries face conflicting policy needs. On the one hand, they are investing in their auto industry and try to promote it on global markets. On the other hand, they face this sudden need to defend it in a way to confront the potential crash that could derive from present geopolitical tensions. I see this with particular evidence in the African case. Here, how we fit in this debate, by outlining only some of the theoretical discussions we have in the book. I leave it to Martin to illustrate how we suggest the need to develop an alternative typology of automobile in that industry development strategy that fits the pattern, the path possibly followed by developing countries in a context of global value chains. Martin, I leave it to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Lorenza, and then I go on. So first of all, just like Peter said yesterday, for his typology, when we try to create a typology, we will not be able to account for all cases, and we cannot explain all cases equally well with the typology. But nevertheless, I think that we try to do this in order to come away from this really unproductive ISI or EOI dichotomy that we have. And we basically came up with three different types that we call three champion strategies. And I will all explain them on the following slides. Just in brief, we have national champion, which basically means that countries try to create or nurture a globally competitive industry player. We have a product champion, which basically means that countries try to promote specialization into a certain product or specific product types or segments. And lastly, technology champion, which basically means that we try to change the existing technology paradigm in a certain way to get ahead in the GVC. Okay, and then first I start with national champions because this is the most straightforward and the most probably well known to everyone. So there are lots of different countries who have tried to create state-owned or quasi-state-owned national car makers. And China, India, Indonesia, Malaysia are just some examples. There are others. And basically, in all of these cases, we faced first the issue that those national champions cannot really build from scratch. And so usually you rely on the assistance of foreign OEMs for startup or even for more permanent support in a joint venture, because you cannot just start a car company from nothing, usually, if you are a developing country. And this usually then leads to lots of tricky arrangements. So either we have conflict inside joint ventures, or after we have initial startup assistance, then the company faces trouble of how to master technology on its own. And therefore, national champions have a pretty mixed record when it comes to success or failure. Just on that, success or failure can be debated endlessly by political economists, because we usually have a pretty big problem on deciding what kind of things are needed for success, right? And I think we landed on the idea that even if China and India, when we wrote this book, were not having any internationally competitive car makers, they were on the way, and they have a pretty strong supplier industry. So at least for us, this would count as success. But like I said, most of these SOEs or Indian private OEMs have been relatively unsuccessful in international markets, and we are just witnessing all how this is changing at the moment. And interestingly, this is mostly the case with Chinese private companies. So part of our analysis still stands, I think. To wrap it up, or maybe to look forward to the discussion, it seems that the cases where we have relative success, it's important to have a relatively big protected national market and some outside technology assistance to get off the ground, which maybe fits pretty nicely with what Peter told us yesterday about autonomous protected peripheries. Okay, then the next is the product champion, and this basically again means that countries try to promote a particular type of vehicle, and they basically try to use demand and supply side incentives to make car production in their country interesting. And because we are talking about international, let's say, political economy and development strategies, I would like to try to briefly outline what the strategy is. So first of all, usually product champion strategy means that you try to require domestic component production to deepen the supply chain. You basically provide incentives for investment that are coupled with really high output targets, which basically requires car makers that take those incentives to export. And lastly, in order to try to deepen the value creation inside the country, you also provide additional incentives if if OEMs or suppliers decide to carry out R&D or other headquarter functions in developing countries. Okay, to make it more straightforward, Thailand is probably the best example for product champion strategy, which is explained in our volume by Kriyankai Techakanont and his colleague Roger Bousset. And basically, they described that Thailand has promoted one-ton pickup trucks, and then later eco cars, so relatively fuel-efficient small cars, and lately EVs. And basically, OEMs have turned Thailand into an production and export hub. And currently, they try to do the same thing with EVs, and this is on the way. And then Bruno, which is going to talk later about Argentina, describes very well in his chapter that basically you have the same thing happening in Argentina without any policy support. And this suggests that this strategy can also be achieved by simply letting the market decide what should occur. So in that sense, it's basically like not a national strategy, but just supporting the OEMs and their intentions. Okay, and then technology champion, like I said, basically means that you try to break away from the existing technology paradigm and you try to replace it with something else. And obviously, what China is doing and what this has done to the existing automotive industry in Europe, Japan, Korea, and the States is pretty obvious. So you try to go from ICE technology where you are not competitive to something where you are more competitive, like batteries and electric cars. I want to stress that we shouldn't just focus on let's say, from my point of view, there's too much attention on the technological change, and now is the best time to disrupt, and developing countries should just try to disrupt. I think this is the wrong idea. I think that the powertrain is changing, and it's true that now it's a good time to disrupt. But there are other things that need to be done if you want to be successful as a car maker. And economies of scale still matter greatly. And for lots of developing countries, achieving those economies of scale without exports or even with exports is really challenging. Okay, so to wrap up, we also think about how those three strategies are fitting with a world of global value chains and all the regulations that come with it. And so for the national champion, we have a really bad fit because basically you try to do what is not allowed by trade policy, so protectionism and building up the industry behind your own borders. And basically, this maybe only works for really huge countries like China and India because you have the market that you can use as a, well, you can exchange the market for investment and then extract incentives and technology and other things you want from foreign OEMs. But for most countries, the strategy will probably not work because they are not big and interesting enough. Then, on the other hand, product champion is very compatible with GVCs because you basically try to promote specialization at the national or even cluster level. And basically, countries just try to reinforce what OEMs want to do anyway. So specialization, and therefore, I think this is a pretty straightforward fit and a strategy that lots of developing countries can use. And then lastly, for the technology champion, I think the logic is pretty straightforward. So trying to change the technology paradigm is easy to understand, but doing it is really difficult. And because we are in an industry where technological change is relatively slow compared to other industries, the automotive industry is maybe not the best example for using this strategy because the opportunity to disrupt maybe just comes every 80 to 100 years. So I think the disruption logic is clear, but using it is a different story. Okay, then, yeah, this is basically repeating it, so I'm leaving it here, and I think we move on to the next presentation.
Okay, so now we pass on the floor to Bruno Perez Almansi on Argentina. Grazie, Bruno.
Can you see the PowerPoint? Okay, great. Well, First of all, thank you very much, Martin, Lorenza, for organizing this seminar and for coordinating all the book that I sincerely think that it's a very good work. And as far as I know, I think it wasn't done before in an initiative like this, gathering all these developing countries' cases all together, and also all the theoretical chapter and the comparison of all these cases. I really think that it's a very rich and interesting work, and it's going to be very useful in the future. I will refer to the chapter of Argentina, but also I will mention some of the ideas of this article that we wrote together with Tobias Wuttke, that is going to present after me. And I think he's going to develop even further the article. I will only mention some ideas on this comparison between Thailand, South Africa, and Argentina, as you were also introducing before. So, and just a brief context for you, because I think the Argentinian case is not well known in your piece or internationally in general. So a brief historical and context and regional context. Argentina is one of the three Latin American countries that produces vehicles. As you can see, the cases of Brazil and Mexico, I think, are more known than the Argentinian one. The three of them are peripheral countries that are based on foreign automakers and mainly foreign suppliers. Mexico more connected as an integrated periphery with United States in the North American Trade Agreement, and Brazil and Argentina as part of this macro-regional periphery of Mercosur. And despite nowadays, Mexico and Brazil are much bigger players than Argentina. Back in the times during the import substitution industrialization period in the 1950s, 1960s, these three countries shared similar levels of production of vehicles during these years. This situation started to change in the late 1970s, when Brazil, based on its large market, and Mexico, based on the exports to the United States mainly, started to grow much faster than Argentina. As you can see, nowadays Mexico produces 8 times as Argentina, and Brazil 4 or 5 times more than Argentina. Nowadays, Argentina is quite a small player. And this competition with these two big producers in Latin America has been shaping also the evolution and the trajectory of the industrial output in the country, also disputing the regional market of Latin America with these two other countries. And on the other hand, the evolution was also driven and shaped by the internal conditions of Argentina, that is actually a very unstable country, Argentina, very unstable economically and politically, with a lot of economic crisis, a lot of changing governments, a not stable industrial policy, different short-term and goals in the governments, not stable bureaucracy, and all these features that make the Argentina quite an unstable country and case. So I'll mention some of the main industrial policies, in my opinion, that were maintained during the last decades. And also, I see that is connected Horacio Cepeda here in this meeting. I don't know if it's the Horacio Cepeda that I know, but Horacio Cepeda was a high public officer in the Ministry of Industry in Argentina. I don't know if it's the same one as I know, but if he's also in this meeting, it will be interesting also that he contributes later in the discussion, because he was the responsible of the industrial industry of the industrial policy in the automotive industry until 2015. Well, mainly during the 1980s, the market was quite closed, was a closed market in national terms. In the gray bars, you can see the imports of auto parts, and in the green line, the exports of vehicles. And during the 1990s, the Argentinian market was quite closed until the beginning of the 1990s, when the free trade agreement, the Mercosur trade agreement, was implemented with Brazil. that implied a tariff-free intra-block trade with Brazil, a compensated trade in automotive goods between these two countries, 35% of tariffs for vehicles from outside the region. That is quite a high level of protection of tariffs for vehicles, and between 12 and 17% for imports of auto parts during this from outside the region. And after this trade agreement, actually, the automotive industry experienced a growth, as you can see, during the 1990s. In the blue line is the production of vehicles, and the green line is the exports of vehicles. And mainly, this growth was driven by these exports to Brazil that were allowed by this trade agreement. But in 2001, 2002, Argentina experienced a very deep economic crisis that contracted much the internal market. And after that, the conditions of the trade agreement with Brazil changed a bit, and also this new policy was implemented that was very promoted by the automakers and resisted from the auto parts suppliers in the country, that allowed tariff-free imports of auto parts from outside the region for the vehicles that were aimed to export. So after that, in the 21st century, at the beginning of the century, the automotive industry experienced another cycle of growth, also very driven by the exports to Brazil, and also following all the commodity boom period in Latin America that were most of the countries and also Brazil growing during all these years. But at the same time that this increase in the production of vehicles was seen, the auto parts imports in the country started to grow a lot, as you can see in the gray bars there. And this was quite an important problem also in Argentina, taking into account all the macroeconomic and economic problems that the country has systematically, I would say. So that's why these two laws in 2008 and 2016 were implemented, that were tax incentives for automakers to purchase locally produced auto parts, to try to stop a bit this auto parts trade deficit that was very, very high, and it's still very high in the country. But anyway, I think my opinion is that these policies weren't very effective, and actually the deficit in the auto parts sector continues very, very high. These are the main, there were a lot of short-term policies that were changing according to the different governments, but these are, in my opinion, the main industrial policies that were also maintained until now, with a very liberal government. As you may know, maybe Milei's government is a very liberal government, and these policies are still in place with this government nowadays. But inside the automotive industry and inside these cycles, it wasn't homogeneous, this movement across the automotive industry. And actually, after 2010, the specialization of the industry started to change quite much. Because a lot of the models of passenger vehicles were replaced with other models of production that were mainly light commercial vehicles, that most of them were medium pickup trucks. And that's why we took this comparison between South Africa, Argentina, and Thailand, because these three countries share most of these models and most of these medium pickup trucks. But in my opinion, and I think it's quite like that, the way in which this product champion strategy was done in Argentina compared to Thailand was quite different, because in Thailand there was, as Martin was explaining, and he showed in his chapter too, this specialization was part of an active industrial policy, of the product champion policy, that was shaping this path. And in Argentina, in my opinion, it wasn't like that. It was much more driven by the market, and much more the choices of the automakers of dividing different type of models, and in this case of dividing the different types of pickup trucks in the three countries of production in Latin America. As you can see, Brazil was mainly specialized in the small pickup trucks, Argentina in the medium ones, and Mexico in the big, on the full size, mainly for the US market. And I think this, anyway, had a good outcome, or a positive outcome in Argentina, because it allowed to limitate the competition with Mexico and Brazil, that have much larger scales and are very competitive players. And Argentina, as a mid-sized country with also another problems of competitivity, it's very difficult, the competition with Mexico and Brazil. So this specialization in medium pickup trucks allowed the country to compete less with them, and also to export to, not only to Brazil, but to other Latin American countries during the last years. And this process of specialization in medium pickup trucks was mainly driven and led by one company and one model in particular. That is the Toyota Hilux and Toyota in Argentina. As you can see here in the chart, this part of the comparison with South Africa and Thailand. Because in Argentina, the Toyota Hilux has been produced around 150,000 vehicles per year. That is a very historical and high record for one model, for one line of production in Argentina. But despite this outstanding performance, despite this high record, Argentina, in this example with Toyota, but with the rest of the medium pickup trucks too, could not achieve, could not scale up to other activities, could not gather the R&D offices, could not attract the development and design of the Hilux model, could not develop the production of engines or transmission systems that are actually imported from Thailand, could not develop a very specialized supply chain, yes, but with a lot of auto parts imports, and not with not so many mega suppliers that are mainly in Thailand. And why is that? Because actually the main hub for the Toyota Hilux in this case, but for other medium pickup trucks too, are in Thailand. So I think this is interesting also in line with the lessons or the debate of the book. What is the development space for these countries? What are the possibilities of industrial policies, mainly, or at least in this product champion extensive development strategy? And this is what we define, or we analyzed in the article, as an adding up problem, or zero-sum dynamics, in the way that you not only are competing with other countries, but you are also competing with the same multinational company, with other subsidiaries that are producing the same models. And in this case, it's very clear, Argentina could not develop more complex activities because Thailand was occupying this place. And there is a lot of competition there too, and there is a way of the only way to achieve these levels is to displace the other player. So there is a lot of competition in the global south too when we think about development. And well, there is a table also showing that there is the R&D centers in other parts of the world. So to conclude, some of these ideas I think that the case of Argentina, that is based on FDI, that could increase the output, increase the jobs, increase the exports in some way, but not so much any other complex activities. And it shows also the limits and the problems of the product champion strategy, despite the fact that the way that Thailand and Argentina did it in different ways, some positive consequences and positive outcomes were for Argentina, but with this limit connected with the global value chain and how the multinational companies organize their production around the world. Because for this example and for the mid-sized countries in macro-regional peripheries, the competition is very high. The competition is very high from Mexico and Brazil. The competition is very high from China, like in any other parts of the world. And the competition is very high also from the same subsidiaries in this case of Thailand, that is a main hub of these products and these models. So the message or the lesson is a bit difficult, but I think, or a bit negative in a way, that I think that the space for development is very, very narrow for these cases, very, very narrow. And also, and just a final thought to include, I think that also, and what is happening right now in Argentina and the current discussions, I think what the current government in Argentina, that is a very liberal government, the government of Milei, I think they're actually thinking, and they would like to follow much more another case that I think it would be also interesting to discuss, and it would be also an interesting case in the book. That is the Australian case. That is actually the exit from the industry. What happened in Australia when they shut down and they closed the industry in 2017? I mean, I think it's quite difficult that they will follow this path, because there is a lot of employment and a lot of restrictions, also the trade agreement with Mercosur. But I know, and I'm quite sure that this is the direction that the current government in Argentina would like to follow. And I think also in analytical terms, the case of Australia is interesting to study what happened there when they went out from the industry. So these were the main ideas that I wanted to share here with you, and we can continue it in the discussion.
Thank you very much, Bruno. So now, strongly connected to this case, there is the presentation by Tobias Wuttke from Gothenburg University, right, at the moment, on South Africa. But that will link up to Bruno's presentation and their comparative work.
Yes. Thank you. Okay. Yes, this actually connects quite nicely. But first, I also want to congratulate you, Lorenza and Martin, for putting this book together. I know it has been quite an effort, and it's great that it's out now. And I think it's a really great volume with lots of interesting contributions. What I'm presenting today, it links up to what Bruno was presenting just now. I will continue on the comparison between the three countries, but then also expand what we can learn from those cases more broadly for the topic that you have selected for this webinar on development strategies and industrial policy in the auto industry. So I'm based at University of Gothenburg, that's correct, since 1st of January. And this what I'm presenting today is based on work that I've done for my PhD on South Africa, and then later was expanded into also comparative work. I'm currently working also on Europe and China and EVs. The four pieces that I've put up here, the last one is the one that Bruno alluded to, which is the comparison between Thailand, South Africa, and Argentina. And then we have the chapter with Lorenza and Gwendolina in the edited volume, but also prior work on South Africa specifically, where a lot of the empirical detail is in, that was then later used to expand the argument. So in terms of the comparison between Thailand, South Africa, and Argentina, we really start from this chart on the left-hand side about the production volumes, based on which I have been going on about this little bit obvious and boring argument that it's all about economies of scale. But I think it is an extremely important point to continue to make and to also conceptualize what does it then mean for development space and strategies. So we see here Thailand, Argentina, and South Africa in comparison, and we see that when they opened up their automotive industries all in the mid-90s, Thailand slightly earlier, but basically they were fully import substitution focused on the domestic market, and then liberalized their auto industries with much more export orientation. And then we see this very differential performance emerging. And that is quite an interesting comparison in our argument, because they are not so different in terms of population, income levels, and the starting position in the mid-1990s. The argument that we then go on to make, it's really about the production volumes of vehicles and the economies of scale. We see this here on the right-hand side, and the first chart, which is about the trade balance, where Thailand has managed to have an overwhelmingly positive trade balance in the auto industry, which is important because it earns you foreign exchange. And South Africa has managed to actually have a slightly positive trade balance most of the time, whereas Argentina has really struggled to have a positive trade balance in the auto sector, as Bruno just explained. Then we go on to show in the paper, which is co-authored not only with Bruno, but also with Kriang Kraitecha Kanwand. We go on to show the further spillover effects coming from Thailand's larger production volumes. And we go on to show that this then manifests itself in the number of component suppliers, but especially also in the employment figures in both assembly and component production. As Bruno already mentioned, only in Thailand do we see R&D activities by the OEMs. In South Africa and Argentina, we do not see that. We then see it also further in the supply chain, that actually some Thai suppliers, Thai Summit Group especially sticks out, but there are a few more that we discuss in the paper that have actually managed to globalize successfully and become tier one suppliers, so that now they pop up in South Africa as the tier one suppliers of Ford or Toyota. But we don't have this with very few exceptions, but they're not comparable in the sense that they're tier one suppliers. Some South African and Argentinian suppliers, of course, operate globally, but not in that scale. And we also observe more technological upgrading of suppliers in Thailand versus in South Africa and Argentina, which we talk about, especially based on Gwendolina Ansulin's work in our chapter as well. So the reason for the large production volumes in Thailand is, as Martin already mentioned, this product champion focus on pickup trucks. That was intentional from the beginning. At the end of my presentation, I will go on to discuss why Thailand has done better. But bear with me a little bit to just show what we have called the spillover effects of having larger production volumes for local development, and also on the mechanisms. Before, in the end, I will say something about how can we explain this. So when we look, Bruno had the same slide. When we look at the three countries, they actually produce the same vehicle models in several cases. And we see that Thailand has, in all cases, the largest production volume. And that has this effect that Bruno already explained, that then in Argentina, if Toyota is trying to localize production, they're basically competing against their operation in Thailand, so that they are importing the engines and the transmissions rather than localizing that in Argentina, no matter how much you try with your industrial policy to localize that. And the dynamics repeat for the other models. I think Thailand is truly the case of the product champion, as Martin defined it. But then, interestingly, we also have South Africa and Argentina as kind of product champions as well, but I would call them accidental product champions, because that was not the intention. So in Argentina, Bruno already explained how it was related to the Mercosur trade deal. In South Africa, it's simply a feature of local demand and what kind of vehicles are popular in Africa. But they end up competing in the same space. And Thailand became actually the global hub for the Toyota Hilux, for the Isuzu D-Max, and for the Mitsubishi as well. The engines and the transmissions for these cars are produced in Thailand, and the R&D centers are in the country as well. If we look at the next slide here. So we see that for these models, Argentina and South Africa have not managed to attract any R&D functions, whereas Thailand has, which we argue is related to the economies of scale, but is also related to policy, which we discuss later. The Ford Ranger, interestingly, still has the R&D in Australia, although there's no manufacturing. Then we also have this further down the supply chain as well, that the tier one suppliers also have R&D operations in Thailand, especially the Japanese ones have R&D in Thailand as well, whereas in Argentina and South Africa, we see this effect down the supply chain, that the R&D functions are also not localized, because if the OEM is not doing local design and development work, the tier one suppliers are not doing it, and then that filters down the supply chain to the tier one and tier three suppliers as well. So in terms of conceptualizing how do the production volumes translate into the spillover effects for development locally, this is the figure that we have put in the paper. I think it's very important here to emphasize that it's mainly about production volumes per vehicle model. So I think that's the reason why the product champion is actually a good strategy, and especially if it's intentional, and a reasonable strategy, because you get the economies of scale at the vehicle model that then again filter down the supply chain. In the 2023 article in Journal of Development Studies on South Africa, I show this in the South African supply chain, that it goes down to the level of materials production. And Lorenza has also worked and published on this in steel, aluminium, and polymers. All of this, in South Africa, you always have this notion, okay, we have an automotive industry. Why don't we link this up to our existing chemical industry, polymer industry? We have an aluminium industry. We have a steel industry. Let's link all of these together. But it all breaks down when you realize how the OEMs do the sourcing of their materials for the components. And it all depends on economies of scale again. And it depends, every OEM is different, has a different specification for the materials. So it really depends on the OEM and the vehicle models. You need scale at the vehicle model and the OEM level. And then the scale benefits lead to the localization of more component production, including engine and transmissions. It also matters, we argue, for local suppliers. In the case of Thailand, South Africa, and Argentina, we are still overwhelmingly talking about a case of FDI-driven foreign ownership. But even if domestic companies want to compete, it probably helps to have access to local economies of scale. Yes, exports are possible, but where do you start? Usually closer to home. So let me just spend a short moment on why has Thailand outperformed Argentina and South Africa. We highlight three factors at the end of the paper, which is location and market access, the first mover advantage, so timing, and then industrial policy. So obviously, Thailand is located in the Asia Pacific region, which is simply closer to growing markets and more dynamic. South Africa is geographically isolated, so it's quite remarkable that they have managed to pull off what they have pulled off. Maybe they could be called a far-away integrated periphery, because they are essentially an integrated periphery of Europe. Most of their exports go to Europe. That is the EU and the UK. But they are far away. Nevertheless, they are really integrated as a periphery into that kind of production network. Argentina's exports are very, very dramatically regionally concentrated. I think 96% to Brazil. Then, in terms of the first mover advantage, Thailand became the global pickup hub first, and intentionally. And once established, of course, you have path dependency dynamics. We discuss one interesting case in the paper, which is where South Africa has now become the largest location for the Ford Ranger through a recent investment. And then we actually see what this leads to, which is then kind of supports our earlier argument, is that suddenly you get more localization of engine production based on the higher volumes. And South Africa actually managed to wrestle away some of the engine assembly, at least, from Thailand in that case. So it really is about winning in this adding up problem, as Bruno called it. And then lastly, we still maintain the point that the crucial factor was industrial policy, because at least the second factor, the first mover advantage, you can really explain also through industrial policy. The advantage was a result of the policy that they implemented. And location and market disadvantages, the first point, it can be overcome. The South African experience shows that. So the industrial policy is really the factor here that explains the differential performance. And Thailand was the only out of the three cases that used comprehensively supply and demand side policy measures. So South Africa is really only a supply side policy story, tax incentives, FDI incentives. Whereas Thailand really also had the demand side policy component to it, as Martin already mentioned, incentivizing the purchase of a certain vehicle type on the domestic market. And then also on attracting R&D and regional headquarter functions for this particular vehicle type. South Africa is, as I said, very much a supply side story, quite a successful one, because it managed to overcome the geographical disadvantage, the location. But the policies have always been model agnostic. They have not tried to limit the number of OEMs they let in or the types of models. But it has nevertheless worked quite well because OEMs by themselves have the tendency to scale up production in certain vehicle models. And then Argentina's case has already been discussed by Bruno. So let me just make 4 points to close. I mean, the lesson here is that it's really about maximizing volume by vehicle model. The second point is that we have looked now here at a quite isolated case, like 3 countries, all very much foreign dominated. So even the success case, Thailand is still very much foreign dominated. It's a similar story, I would say, as in Eastern Europe, large scale, but few national firms at the higher tiers and or that manage to be globally competitive. In the top 100 supplier firms globally, we only have 2 emerging economy firms that are not from China. So that is the story anywhere, right? Where we have this extensive FDI-dependent automotive development. And then local suppliers are confined to the same type of components in almost every country. So true economic upgrading happens when you pursue the national champion way or the intensive automotive development story, because it requires indigenous car makers to then actually have the spillover effects. South Korea and China are the examples. But I mean, already that shows you the downsides also of this, because Malaysia has tried that, Indonesia has tried that. It's not easy to pull it off. It can easily go into the other direction. So just to say you need intensive automotive development is quite easily said, but much more difficult to execute. And then at the end of the day, the most important question I want to pose is, do we actually have a trade-off here? Which is something that Justin Barnes, for example, for the case of South Africa, always argues, is that actually South Africa has done what it could on the margins. It could have done maybe a little bit better in terms of scaling up, but it should never have even tried the intensive story with indigenous companies and car makers, because that would have destroyed the other model. The question is, are both possible at the same time, or maybe building on each other? Let's see what Thailand can do, or Turkey with the case of TOG. But that's kind of the question I would like to maybe also address in a Q&A with all of you. So let me close there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tobias. We now have the last presentation by Alexandre de Potesta Gomes from University of Campinas on China. Thank you, Alexandre.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. So thank you, everyone.
Sorry, I don't see it in full screen. Do others see it in full screen? No. Click on presentation mode again.
I'm sharing here, but can stop sharing. Let me try again. Can you see it?
Yes, but still not in full screen. Go again.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I made it. Okay, great. Okay, thank you, everyone. Sorry for the small technical problem here. Okay, so my name is Alexandre. I'm a researcher here at the State University of Campinas in Brazil. So let me start thanking Lorenza and Martin for first organizing the book. I know it's very hard work, it's very time consuming, so congratulations for your efforts in putting together this book and all the chapters. So it's a great comprehensive effort, so congratulations for you too. And thank you for inviting me to present my chapter. So my chapter is about China, so we'll discuss the role of the state in general in the emergence of the EV, electric vehicles industry in the case of China. So I try to make my presentation following the advice you guys sent before. So if I understood well, we were supposed to do this 4 items. So I try to fit my book chapter and the research into these 4 items. So first, a brief introduction of the progress of the EV industry in China, and then briefly talk about the type of policy tools that have been used so far and up to the present. Then the third part, I'm trying to characterize how China's industrial development strategy could be characterized. And finally, as a conclusion, I try to point out which factors are promoting or limiting the development in the country, in the case of China, mostly promoting, as it's normally understood as successful case. So that's the general outline for my presentation today. I try to fit the content into this 4 broad items, okay? So let's just start with this is the basics of the progress of the industry in China. So in reality, China started to invest in this industry a long time ago, even before people were talking about, let's say back to the early 90s and mid 90s. That's at the time of the 9th and later the 10th five-year plan. So back then, the 90s, China was mostly investing in basic research and eventually into prototypes. So there was no commercialization of EVs, but this laid really the cornerstone for the development of the industry in the 2000s. And it's only in the 2000s, in particular after 2006, when China tried to promote a sort of paradigm shift in terms of focusing on innovation-driven, as they do call, or indigenous innovation, that EVs become even more important. So EVs could be understood as a typical case of this broader innovation-driven strategy, or this broader indigenous innovation strategy that has become the hallmark of Chinese development in the past 15 to 20 years, right? And in 2009, they start to commercialize EVs, so that's to sell EVs into the market. And then the following decade, the 2010s, China, as you know, become the largest market in the world for EVs and becomes really the success story that everyone starts to see on the media and everywhere else. But it's not only a story of success in terms of EV production, but also in other segments of the supply chain. So the idea is really to dominate the supply chain from downstream to upstream. And here you can highlight, of course, both the production of lithium-ion batteries and the processing and refining of minerals, in particular lithium. So when you think about batteries, I think probably everyone has heard about CATL, the largest lithium-ion battery manufacturer in the world, but also BYD, which is, of course, a vertically integrated company. So they do everything from the batteries up to the assembly of EVs. Less well known are the processing and refining steps of lithium and other minerals. So if you think about Ganfeng Lithium and TNT Lithium, these are very important companies and leading their sectors in terms of refining lithium. So they basically take lithium from the nature and transform into either carbonate lithium or hydrox lithium. So that's how they have to use in order to make the batteries. So these are not so well-known companies and segments, but they're very important for the whole supply chain. That's where China also excels very well here. So the dominance of other segments, the supply chain, and also followed by technological upgrading elsewhere, not only in the manufacturing of EVs, but also the manufacturing of batteries, which is really, let's say, the core of the technology for EVs. So in the second part, I tried to point out which were the main policy tools used. So here it's impossible to select or to single out one particular policy that was the most important, that made the magic happen. It's really about the idea of policy packages, in my view. So multiple supportive policies, both on the supply side and demand side. So we can talk in details about any of those policies later in the Q&A, but let me just briefly point out that it's about the interaction between them. So you have everything ranging from tax exemptions, for instance, the sale tax that has been exempted for many years, but you also have purchase subsidies that were given to manufacturers. You have different types of subsidies, such as the trading subsidies, for instance, consumers that wanted to change their old ICE, the combustion engine car, to EV, they would get a subsidy to change, to make this transition. Of course, government procurement was very important, in particular in the early stages when China was investing heavily into electric buses, for instance. So this was very important to promote technological upgrading in this particular segment of buses that later spilled over to regular passenger cars. And there are a whole array of regulatory policies. So could highlight the so-called green license plate policy. It was very important in some selected major cities in which owners of EVs were given this advantage to get a new license plate, which can be quite troublesome to get for ICEs, but for EVs it becomes much easier. So that's the green license policy. We have also other types of regulatory advantages. For instance, many cities allowed EV owners to drive in areas or to have access in areas or to park areas where ICE were not allowed. So this was a very important non-monetary regulatory policy advantage. And also the dual credit policy, in which companies are incentivized to migrate their manufacturing from combustion engine to EVs. So all this set of policies were very important to promote the whole industry. So it's not only one particular policy, but the combination of them. So in the third part, I think the challenge here would be how to characterize China's industrial development strategy. And of course, there are many ways to do that, and there's not only one answer that. What I tried to do in the book chapter, but also in other previous work, was to combine different elements. So what I tried to argue here is that you can characterize Chinese strategy by a combination of a typical mission-oriented innovation strategy to employ the framework by Mazzucato. Also the idea of creative incoherences that I don't see very much used in the literature, so I try to make this point here. So in terms of missions, so it's really the idea that China is tackling different and combined grand challenges, societal challenges. So we're talking about not only economic and technological challenges, that's what everyone talks about. So China is doing this leapfrogging strategy, which of course it's true, but also there's a geoeconomic element and there's also environmental goals involved. So in terms of geoeconomic challenges, for instance, China has grown very dependent on the imports of oil. So one of the elements in promoting these should become less dependent of oil prices, and therefore to create new dependencies for other countries in the new supply chain of, let's say, critical minerals and refining and processing of minerals, as discussed before. So it's about changing one dependency and create other dependencies to other countries in the sense. But also environmental goals, of course, are very important, not only in terms of the emission of CO2, but especially also in terms of promoting a more livable cities, for instance, and less noisy. So in terms of urban pollution, this is very important. So all this combination of different societal challenges that can be tackled by the idea of emissions. But this, I'd argue, it's one part of the strategy, not everything. So what I find particularly important to understand China's industrial strategy, not only for EVs, but other industries as well, is the interaction between the central government and local governments, in particular in the design and implementation of different policies. So the question is, how do you combine this mission approach where the state decides the direction of the industrial development with a lot of flexibility in terms of local implementation, with a lot of adaptation, a lot of learning at the local level. So that's the challenge. And I believe the concept of creative incoherences that has been brought before by Colin Crouch, so a scholar from comparative political economy, could be helpful here to make sense of the interaction between the central government on the one hand and local governments on the other. So in more concrete terms, what I argue is that the central government is more responsible for the provision of a long-term agenda in line with the idea of emissions. So it provides the direction of industrial transformation. So to move slowly from combustion engine to electric vehicles. So that's the direction that's provided by the central state. And that's related to all these grand challenges that we're talking about before. And also provides the political support and legitimacy. So that's something that is lacking in many developing countries. So a consistent support over time. So that's what we find in China, and mostly we don't find in other developing countries. That helps to mitigate the uncertainties typical of the innovation process, of course, and to bring in private investment, so bringing or crowd in private agents, both companies, but also local governments. So that gives the agenda and provides the support for other agents to come in and take part of the industry. So this is the central government. And then what local governments will be doing is to promote a lot of policy experimentation, adaptation, and implementation. And that's possible in my view, because to start with, the rationales of promoting EVs are very broad. It's not only about promoting leapfrogging development, this is part of the story, but as we discussed it, there is important concerns in terms of environmental goals, also geoeconomic goals. So different local governments can exploit different rationales in order to promote different local models of development. So for instance, you can focus mostly on the market expansion, so to create higher output regardless of technological upgrading and leapfrogging. So as long as you are attaining one of the goals, that's workable. So you can attain the goal of market expansion and industrial development without necessarily promoting the most sophisticated EV. So I'll give an example to illustrate that. So the point is, local governments, they manage to intermediate between the central level goals related to missions and the direction of industrial development with local realities. That in the case of China, we're still talking about a middle-income country. So if income per capita 3-4 times lower than most Western economies. That means, for instance, in many localities, they don't have the productive capabilities to do the most sophisticated products. So we'll discuss that soon. And this will lead to an array of different local models to promote the industry. So one example that I believe is perhaps the most famous one is the promotion of microcars, or sometimes classified as A00 in the official statistics. So perhaps the most famous case is the Wuling Hongguan Mini EV, which became the top-selling product in China some years ago, and is still quite well, ranks quite well in the league tables. So these are very simple, low-cost, affordable micro EVs. So they are very simple. They are not catered for people who have a lot of money. So again, this is a sort of adaptation to the realities of China. Right? So still middle-income economy. And this was possible due to the local combination and the alliance between local governments on the hand and local companies. So they create a lot of favorable local policies in order to support this industry and to support this particular model of promoting affordable micro EVs, which are not necessarily what the central government really wanted. Just think that, for instance, because they were not really sophisticated. For example, their driving range was very low. They're not even eligible to purchase subsidies. So everyone was talking about purchase subsidies in 2022, right? But you see, the top selling product back then didn't receive those subsidies. So that creates a bit of a tension between what the central government wanted in terms of goals and what the local governments could do. And this intermediation, so this combination of central goals on the one hand and local realities. So they managed to exploit, on the other hand, different types of supportive policies, such as the dual credit policy. So local governments have been very creative in adapting central goals to their own realities and catering for central goals in different ways. So this to give you an idea of the data. The Hongguan Mini EV started to be sold in July of 2020. So that's the first data here in the presentation in blue. Ever since, they have been selling more and more. So the data here is not only for the Hongguan, but for every single micro EV classified as A00. So other mainstream companies like BYD started to produce also micro cars, and other companies also started to copy this model, so to speak. So really the sales skyrocketed in the early 2020s. So as you can see, the latest data I have here is the purple line. So to 2024. So that's when micro EVs reached the highest level of sales, and it has continued to grow into 2025. So this model has become very popular in China. However, there are problems of this model as well, especially that the profit margins are very low. And in reality, when Hongguan Wuling started to be produced, they could only make a profit because of the policy support by the dual credit policy. Yeah? So this created a problem for the long-term development. It's part of the challenge we probably had to discuss. So you have no high profit margins here, contrary-wise to high-end products. And that's a point I believe should be more stressed in the literature. I don't see that much. That is the problem of the demand structure of China vis-a-vis high-income economies. Perhaps it's because of the origins of most scholars who are Westerners. So normally people take for granted that the demand structure found in advanced economies will be replicated in a low or middle-income country like China. That's not really the case. And that has been one of the core concerns in development or industrial development by old Latin American structuralists. So they're trying to understand, well, how can you incorporate the consumption pattern of advanced society in an economy that is much poorer in terms of income per capita? That creates a lot of problems because the average income per capita is much lower in a low or middle income economy. Therefore, if you want to incorporate this consumption pattern, you have to make some adaptations. So what China is doing is precisely to create cheap versions, affordable versions of these products in terms of producing cheaper EVs in order to sell domestically. So the importance of income distribution is also very important. So this is an ongoing debate that, in my view, should be paid more attention. So trying to wrap up the discussion, try to make within the 12 minutes, hopefully. So what are the main factors that promote the development of the industry? So first point is this comprehensive supply and demand policy. So it's not only about supply policy, not only demand, it's everything. So it's about really the comprehensiveness of those supportive policies instead of one or another policy that is special. It's about the consistency over time of implementing different policies that support the industry. What China is not doing here is not, again, fixing the market, many would argue, but really to creating a new market. So the type of concept and theories you need to understand that should be different from mainstream economics. That means it's not about getting the right allocation of resources, not about efficient allocation, but actually the accumulation of productive capabilities and a lot of learning by doing. So over time, there's a lot of technological upgrade in China, even though China started as a laggard in the industry. The technology of EVs, and in particular, lithium-ion batteries were not Chinese, they were mostly American before. So there's a lot of accumulation of productive capabilities. So the idea of that you have misallocation of capital here is not so important in order to understand what's going on here in the industry. That may also help us to understand the current debates on the so-called problems of overcapacity, which you can discuss in the Q&A later. And the last 2 points, it's really important to think about the division of tasks between the center and the local state. So both are important, and the interactions between them are very important. So that's something that is important to highlight. And finally, I'd like to highlight the demand structure of China. So China is still a middle-income economy. It doesn't have the income per capita levels of, say, Germany or the US. That means if you want to incorporate a consumption pattern that has started in advanced economies, doesn't matter here if you're talking about EVs or ICEs, you have to tackle both low-end and high-end segments. So you have to tackle high-end segments because that's where large profits are, but you have to also incorporate low-end strategies because that's where most of the demand is, even though if the profit margins are very thin. So what China is trying to do is do both at the same time. Of course, the scale, as Tobias mentioned many times, is very helpful here. Not every country can do that, but we can discuss in more details later. So in a nutshell, that's I'll try to summarize my chapter, and looking forward for your comments. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Martin, now.
Okay. So just like yesterday, I think I basically tried to kick off the discussion by having some questions for each presentation, and then I hope that the rest of the participants will also ask their questions for these very good presentations. So maybe I start with Alexandre. So you just mentioned that from your point of view, basically China created this ecosystem, and this ecosystem is flourished very much, but maybe a bit too much. So we have now lots of players and lots of overcapacity. And what do you think about the first the strategy? So it's pretty obvious that lots of Chinese car makers try to go out and go to different markets, but for political reasons they cannot go to some places and only to others. And the other thing is, as someone who studied China, do you think that the because you mentioned the central and local government dynamic, do you think the central government has any way of, let's say, reining in all those local champions that have been created in China? And then for, I mean, Tobias, basically, I have just one question. That is, you mentioned your three factors. So you have location, timing, and industrial policy as the explanation why Thailand is so successful. Could you try to explain the industrial policy part a bit more? Because let's say, I think if I remember correctly, one of the things that made Thailand so attractive for the Japanese was that they were the first that basically opened the Thai supplier market for takeovers. So that basically you first have that the whole supply chain becomes more or less Japanese, or at least the important part. And then you implement a Japanese-led strategy. And there was basically no defense of the Thai suppliers at the time. So do you have any ideas related to that issue? And then for Bruno, I found this presentation really interesting, and my question was, could you explain a little bit more what you mean with the belay strategy? Because you referenced Australia, and I mean, Australia was basically the story that the government said we are focusing on other industries. Is that true for Argentina? So what's Milei's plan for the future? And yeah, let's start. Maybe with Alexandre, if that's okay.
Okay. Thank you, Martin, for all your comments and questions. Glad you engaged with the presentation. So there are a couple of questions about fragmentation and overcapacity and the role of the central government, right? So indeed, this strategy has created a lot of fragmentation of the industry. This is not a surprise, so to speak, because if the old IC industry was pretty much the same problem, right? So local governments investing a lot and creating perhaps overcapacity, depending on how you define it, and a fragmentation of the industry. So what is different here? It's different at the first point in terms of if you are going to a different industry and if you have a strategy of leapfrogging, the first priority should be learn how to produce it. If you don't know how to produce it, you cannot deal with the other problems. That's something I believe is not emphasized enough. So first, have to produce. So have to, of course, accumulate productive capabilities. And that's what China has done. And I think overall, the positive attributes of this strategy have compensated the negative ones, although the negative exists. So you have to produce first and promote technological upgrading, even if you do that inefficiently in terms of resource allocation, as long as you master the technology and dominate the industry and the supply chain, so to speak, the whole ecosystem. Then the problem is how to rein into these problems and solve these problems. So that's, I think, your second question. So can the central government step in and solve it? For instance, promoting forced consolidation and forced mergers and acquisitions. And politically, it can, in the sense that politically it's possible, but the real question is at what cost? So yeah, it can do that, but if you do that, probably you're going to lose employment, you're going to lose industrial production, and force some bankruptcies. So again, the preference of the center are also very ambiguous. So yes, it would be important to promote consolidation, mergers, and acquisitions, but also that would create problems in terms of employment, especially in a time where there are more employment concerns in China nowadays, especially if the industry, if the economy is not growing so fast as before. So it's possible, but that would create a lot of problems. So that's the main issue here. And the way to solve it, I believe, would be to change the incentive structures of local governments. That means would be a fiscal reform that would possibly give local governments more fiscal resources and reduce the fiscal burden they have. And I think that's what that is behind this behavior of local governments in many industries, with solar PV industries, for instance. It's not only about EVs. I think that would be the most important issue, a fiscal reform that solve this imbalance at the local level.
Okay, I'll just go next in the order of the presentation, like backwards. Yeah, Martin, I think this is a great question, and would be good if Kriang was here. He could speak more to that. But what we observed, I don't know the details of the supplier aspect. I mean, I think what I read from Rick Donner's work mainly is that Thailand was just the first one that just opened up to the Japanese OEMs in that sense. So it was just the first one. But then I think if you look at the policies that then were step by step implemented, and we can only analyze what we see in terms of the policies and then the effects of it. So on the demand side, you have the excise tax, you have the high tariffs also on imported vehicles for those particular models to have that protection. You have the first car buyer incentives. You have all these incentives attached to the 1-ton pickup trucks. And then on the supply side, you have the corporate tax exemptions, 3 to 8 years. You have the machinery import exemptions. You have incentives tied to localization and R&D, and the support for regional headquarters. So that's what we see on the ground, and that happens gradually over time. To me, it's a very interesting political economy question. Why were those policies implemented, and to what extent were they driven by the Japanese OEMs, or maybe even by Japanese involved in the policymaking process? Unfortunately, I I'm not that deep into the case that I can answer that. Maybe Kriang can, maybe Rick would be able to say something about that. So what we analyze in the paper is more the policies on the surface and then the effects, not so much their origin and their political economy background.
Okay, I will follow with the other question. First, I wanted to say that actually Horacio Cepeda, the person that was connected, was this public officer from the Ministry of Industry, and he's not angry with me based on my comments on the industrial policy of Argentina because he wrote to me in good terms. So this is okay, but he had to go away. He's not here anymore. And on the comment on Milei, yeah, well, I think we have a very special and extremist government in in some way, and for sure they have in their plans and in their head to have a country much more based on the competitive advantages of Argentina that are actually the agricultural sector, mining, and energy. And this is where most of the incentives and investments are going right now. And they have been declaring a lot of times against the Mercosur trade agreement. They think that the Mercosur trade agreement ties us to buy a lot of Brazilian products, mainly because 35% of tariffs for the vehicles from outside the zone is quite a high level of tariffs. And all the imports of vehicles from outside are much more expensive. But it's also true that it's not easy at all to go out from Mercosur, not even to close the industry. I mean, a lot of industries are closing, a lot of suppliers and a lot of textile industries, a lot of other type of industries, electronics also, a lot of them are falling. The tariffs are going lower. And in the case of Mercosur and the automotive industry, they are trying to negotiate with Brazil to lower the tariffs of vehicles to allow more imports from outside, but Brazil is against that. So they are in the middle of the negotiations. And for sure, they would like to have a much more primary country, producer of energy and raw materials, for sure. But it's not so easy to go in that direction. And another policy that they have been implementing that is not quite clear if it's allowed in the Mercosur trade agreement, but they are doing it anyway, is to put quotas. They put quotas for imports from outside the country of 50,000 vehicles that they are mainly coming from China, and that are mainly hybrid and electric vehicles, that they are very cheap vehicles because to be accepted in the quota, the price of the vehicles have to be $16,000 FOB, free on board. And only the Chinese vehicles can enter in or mainly Chinese vehicles and models can enter in these quotas. And now, because of the alignment of Argentina with the United States and Trump, they have just signed a trade agreement with US. And also they put quotas to enter in the Argentinian market without the 35% of tariffs. And this will be more for luxury vehicles coming from US. So little by little, as they can, with the constraints of the Mercosur trade agreement and with the risky and the danger of having a lot of jobs and the industry closed, they are trying to liberalize the market. And if the companies can survive, it's okay. And if the companies cannot survive, we are going to produce raw materials and primary products mainly. I think this is their plan. We will see how it goes.
Martin, there are two questions in the chat. Maybe just go for them and then we continue.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, you can read them if you want to, and then maybe we just have other questions and interventions.
Okay, so there are two questions from Lena. So the first one, so I don't know if these are questions addressed to all speakers. Lina, you may specify. But so the first one is, how do you define success for a country trying to foster an automotive industry? As was mentioned, only South Korea and China were able to have an indigenous auto industry, but other countries have been able to have a substantial supplier base, like Thailand. The Tunisian coffee cab, I can't read here, is one of the biggest harness wire producers, tier 2 supplier in the world. When is it enough? I'm playing devil's advocate as I studied the sectors of Morocco and Tunisia. Second, when does subsidizing the demand side work and when does it not? Morocco tried to do it in the 70s and they failed with Somaka and Renault. But Thailand, I think, succeeded. What are the success factors? In the 90s, not in the 70s. So these are the two questions. I'll add my one comment and then so two thoughts here. So one is, first of all, thank you very much. I'm very happy of these presentations and how integrated they were, and also related to what Martin introduced in the previous presentation. So very good base for discussion. So one is, I mean, trying to pull a bit a theoretical conclusion on the product champion strategy. I mean, we have reflected, and I mean, some of the the conclusions that Tobias mentioned related to Thailand could be extended to product champion in general. But this is to all three of you, Bruno, Martin, Tobias. When do we consider that this is possible? Because Tobias interestingly defined product champion in the South Africa and Argentinian case as accidental. I mean, given your data, given the data you present, we can't consider it as a successful overall. So only in the Thai case it's successful. So do we conclude that it's only a first mover advantage? Because given South-South competition in the other cases is not successful, and to what extent we can consider it replicable in the end. So I would like us to eventually, I mean, this is also for our discussion, Martin, if we keep elaborating these champions categories later on, but what do we conclude theoretically in the end? And the other thing is, I'm quite worried, given the similarities between Argentina and South Africa, about this Australian path. Oh my God. I mean, on the one I see, I mean, obviously we can't predict, this is pure speculation, but in the Argentinian case, I don't know exactly how sustainable the shift to other sectors could be, but I imagine disruptions in terms of regional balance. I don't know what could happen, but how do you see it? In the South African case that we are reading now of daily plant closures, there is really a negative trend ahead. What we are seeing more than a voluntary exit strategy is, or could be, a replacement of previous OEMs with Chinese OEMs that could save the industry in a way or another, whereby the exit strategy, I don't think is voluntary or some goal that the South African government has, simply because they can't afford it. So these are comments, but I mean, we need to keep an eye, this is my conclusion, on the situation of these two countries. I leave it here, but I see that Tommaso has already booked the next. Bye.
I have the feeling there are already enough questions for us, perhaps for for the speakers to go? What do you think?
Yeah, maybe that's okay. Maybe I just give you briefly my take, and then because Lorenza asked me, and then I leave it to Bruno and Tobias and Alexandre to intervene, I think.
Okay, so Tommaso,
So
you will leave for the next round and conclusion.
So I actually think for me, there's no one correct answer, right? So development is always relative and depending on your perspective. And I think there are lots of countries in Southeast Asia that would give an arm and a leg to be in Thailand's position. And then you have people like Rick Donor and colleagues who would say Thailand is not like a real success story and only China qualifies as a success. And I think you really need to make up your mind what your perspective is, and also if you're a policymaker, what counts as success for your government. So what's your priority? Do you want jobs? Do you want positive trade balance and so on? I think there's no one correct answer, right? And it's also not really productive to argue about what the right answer is. I think from an academic standpoint, it's maybe interesting, but ultimately unproductive. And then, yeah, maybe Tobias and Bruno can give their take.
Yeah, I don't have, I don't know, Tobias, if you have an answer, more structured answer. Yeah, I think I agree. I think there is not like a direct answer. In more academic terms or more analytical terms, as we are thinking and we are discussing, and we also discussed about that in your piece last year in China. I think that I tend to agree in these donor terms. I mean, what is development in the end? Is to have other companies and assembling vehicles there, or is owning the technology, owning the firms, having the headquarters offices in your country? I mean, in terms of development, what we have seen, that the real development, I think, is in China. All the rest are different levels, and of course, I think, as we have been showing, Thailand is much more successful than Argentina. But if we have to compare these different strategies and these different paths, I think that the real development is in China. And this is why I also think about to what extent this path, this case is replicable, it can be done in other countries. I don't know. We are not seeing that India, the national champions in India, or Beam Fast in Vietnam, or Tog in Turkey are achieving the goals that Chinese and Chinese companies are achieving. Think it's very difficult, and it's very particular of the Chinese case, of its government, of its large scales, of a lot of factors. And then is the rest. And well, this is what we were showing in our article, that it's very limited, and the best position or the best thing you can do is more or less in terms of being specialized in one niche, is what Thailand did. And yeah, I repeat a bit what I have been saying before. For countries like Argentina or South Africa, mid-sized countries without big markets not very competitive, with not large scales. I mean, the best thing you have is to produce in specialized in one product, even if you cannot achieve the things that Thailand did. I mean, I prefer that Argentina produces what they do, and we are not Australia, because this would imply 500,000 jobs outside, and this would imply a lot of imports from vehicles, even worse trade balance. I mean, at least we have what we have. I don't know. I think a bit in these terms.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it short because I think you covered most. I I fully agree, Martin, that I mean, Thailand, the case, a lot of other countries would give body parts for having that success. I mean, and I think that's very important to remember also when we start calling maybe the South African case a failure or even Thailand a failure. It always depends on the perspective we are taking. And I think that is quite dangerous because then we end up like Bruno just did, that only China is a success, right? Where does that leave us? So I think we really need to distinguish also like the second tier cases. I think just quickly on Lina's question in the chat. Of course, I mean, North Africa has the benefit of the proximity to Europe. That is already quite different from, for example, the South African case. Morocco, the past, I don't know what you mentioned, but now, of course, is very successful with the classic FDI export-oriented strategy and also having two OEMs, as far as I know, which gives you again the scale part. And I think they by now produce as many vehicles as South Africa, 600,000 or something like that. So it's a success. But I would still argue that I don't see any cases where you see many, and again, the question is what is many, strong local supplier firms emerging in almost any of the cases. So I would still maintain the point that if you want that to happen, you probably need a national scalable car industry. And then the question is who can achieve that. On TOG, maybe I would also not be so pessimistic. I just saw yesterday or the day before some statistics. I don't know if they are reliable, that they sold 40,000 EVs last year in Turkey. So they seem to be able, based on the incentives also, to scale up a bit. Let's see. But yeah, those are just a few short points.
Okay. Very good answers, all of you. Alexandre, do you want to contribute here, or we leave it to Tommaso and Joy wanted to say something about Thailand, and then we allow the speakers to respond?
Sure. Just because, sorry, I turned off my camera because I'm here in Vietnam. It's 10 o'clock already. So just in the case of Thailand, you guys all, sorry, discuss about development and all the stuff. Sorry, you guys can hear me, yeah? Okay. The case of Thailand is very unique, and I'm not going to argue what is developed or what development over China is different case. I also doing research on China. So there are two different settings, I would say. In terms of Thailand, it's become the model in the Southeast Asia. And if you do research on two things about automotive, the infrastructure is very complex. And we tend to focusing on just the first tier and OEM and Toyota. But if you look at it, the history and also the lower tiers, tier 3 and 4, this is how important that country is. So in short, what makes it significantly different of Thailand is that Japanese see Thailand as a backyard of Japan. Like everybody who did manufacturing is always in Japan. That's because Thailand is the only ASEAN countries did not colonized by Japan. And as a result, the first technical training, automotive, coming into Japan is from Thailand. And by the way, I'm not Thai. Secondly, also the Toyota as a mover, they came and invest, not just manufacturing, but also like the German model, the vocational school. Until now, they have a vocational school specific for those people who work in the manufacturing for tier 3 and 4. And also the candidate for those people who work in a Japanese multinational corporation, not just manufacturing. So those two already established, and the government of Thailand invest a lot and invited Japan in comparison to American and European. And thirdly is historically, Toyota also have overseas supply development. Thailand was the first one in 1975. So with all those contexts, perhaps I can shed some light, like why is it then Thailand become the model of industrial development by the Japanese? Because of those reasons. So hopefully it's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Tommaso, finally, it's your turn.
That was very helpful, Joy. Thank you. I was intrigued first, Martin, by your definition of national champions, and you say, well, it might work, but it's very difficult because Indian private OEMs are not doing so well, and state-owned enterprise in China are not doing so well internationally. And my understanding of that is that national champions in emerging countries emerge because you create specific markets, which are difficult for global players. That is true for the new energy vehicle market in China, which is a new market and which did not exist anywhere else. But that's also true for the Indian market, which is very regulated for small light cars, which are not specific to Western OEMs. And that means that these national champions are very strong in their own domestic markets, but by definition, it will be difficult for them to expand overseas. But I don't see this as a weakness. I see this as a condition for them to emerge. And that highlights an aspect that perhaps we should highlight it more, which is the role of regulation and standards globally, because there is nothing that is more regulated than cars. And these regulations are, there is really an hegemonic control from core countries and core companies. This is organized in Geneva. There is a system of harmonized regulations through the United Nations, and is very much controlled. And clearly Europe has organized regulation as a tool to take control of emerging markets. And you see that the Euro 5, 6, 7 then is decline in different countries. That makes it very difficult for national champions in emerging countries to catch up with this regulation because they're set by the technological leaders. And when you create a new markets, you break up these hegemony. I think India and China are successful also because of that. And so that I think it explains perhaps also why you can combine technological champions with national champions, in the sense that when you break up a technology, then you create a new market. You escape from this technological hegemony, and then you can also create national champions. And that is explained why the state-owned enterprise in China has not been successful, because their technology was linked with the Western OEMs, while all these new companies developed the new technology. So I think that would be coherent and would keep the idea that national champions is the way to go. But you need, as Peter said yesterday, a big markets, and protected one, and regulated in a way to not be similar to Western markets, to be different, so that global competitors cannot come and take the markets because they control the technology. So just to summarize some thinking about that. Then on South America, on Argentina, I was wondering, first of all, why comparing with Mexico? Because Mexico is not integrated regionally in Mercosur. And also why comparing with Thailand? I understand the rationale for that, but I still wonder why you do that, because to me, the development of Argentina is similar to the development of Canada. Is typical semi-periphery country whose automotive industry is linked to a major market, which is Brazil. I think that Canada, Argentina have the same population, and Brazil, United States is not exactly the same. And the problem of Argentina is that, contrary to United States, Brazil is a very unstable market. It has a strong, but it's also very unstable. So the problem is more the fact that Brazil did not provide the opportunity to United States, to Argentina, that the Canada, that the United States had produced for because I don't know, I don't believe in for the product champions development that this goes outside regional integration. You can have exception, but basically the automotive industry is regional. Transatlantic long-term exports are the exception, for the reason that were also described yesterday by Martin and Lorenza. So I don't really believe in the idea that Argentina could become a global hub for exporting cars all around the world. So the future of Argentina is in Mercosur. I don't know. I don't see why you want to explore a different way. But I think intellectually this is stimulating, but in terms of in practical terms, I do not see why comparing in that way. And then I finally go to Tobias, which I really like. I really like this comparison, but at the same time, I'm not sure it really works. And so the conclusion that industrial policy is what really matters. I like it, but I'm not so convinced, because it would be nice if it wasn't the country that is most regionally integrated and was the first mover that comes out first, but the country that has the worst geography position and is the late mover, but has the best industrial policy that comes first. Then yes, you can make clearly the argument that industrial policy matters. But here it seems that it's difficult to imagine that Argentina and South Africa could outcompete Thailand because of a better industrial policies. I mean, even if you made the case to imagine that Toyota or Ford would put in Argentina and South Africa their global hub for special products to export, it seems difficult to imagine. And so while again I found it intellectually interesting, I think that the argument of why industrial policy plays first should be really, I mean, perhaps you're right, but I'm not convinced. So I think that it cannot come as, this is my argument. We really need to see why you think that industrial policy was crucial. And a comparison to that, I think, could be Slovakia. So Slovakia is the big winner of car production in Eastern Europe. But you cannot say the industrial policy of Slovakia has been so fantastic or particularly different. It's just that Volkswagen has bet into Slovakia, and then FDI came, and there is not even a strong supplier basis in Slovakia, and still is becoming the fourth European producer. After Germany, Spain, and Czech Republic, you have Slovakia. And typically this is because Volkswagen decided that, and Toyota decided about Thailand. So I think this role of companies creating bases, and I think Thailand is a different story than Slovakia, but I think this matters more than the industrial policy. And perhaps my final remark, industrial policies can be driven by opportunities, in the sense that the geographical positions, the investment of certain OEMs create opportunities, then drive industrial policies. So government responds to stimuli, and that might perhaps be the path dependencies of histories, that opportunities create industrial policies, then foster development in different ways. And that is the complicated story that we need to deal with. That's it. And perhaps just the final remark about China is the fact that China is a very unbalanced developing countries. You have very poor rural areas and very rich industrialized areas. And that creates both the market for the cars, so those who buy cars are in the rich area, and the workforce that support this huge industry. So BYD is reliant enormously on migrant workers that are not only blue collars, but also engineers and technicians. And these imbalances, I think, is also important in the development of the Chinese industry. And perhaps another remark on that is that the automotive industry is strategic because it needs supplies for all type of industry. You need plastic, you need caoutchouc, you need electronics, software, whatever. So on one hand, it's nice to have it because you develop the other industry, but on the other hand, if you don't have the other industry, it's difficult to develop. And that's what I think push for value chain specialization. It's easier to take a segment rather than to build this whole industry and the support industry. China has it, and that's perhaps India has it to a certain extent. You have the backlinkage. You have the whole industry that can support the intensive effort, while many other countries are just have parts of the puzzle and cannot build the whole thing. So I think this could be another way of looking at this. Stop here.
Should I start? Or
I don't know, maybe. Yeah, Bruno, if you want to react, then I wait. Then go first.
Okay. No, just a comment on the Mexico and Argentina comparison. I mean, for sure, they are very different countries, of course. But in terms of, for example, attracting investments, they are the same company, the two subsidiaries are fighting all the time for these investments. For example, nowadays, last year, the Nissan Frontier closed in Argentina because they moved all the production to Mexico, and they dispute a lot all the regional market, not only Mercosur. For example, half of the exports of the medium pickup trucks go beyond Mercosur. The exports of Argentina go a lot to Chile, Ecuador, Peru, Colombia, Central America, Venezuela, and all these countries are not inside Mercosur, and these countries are markets that are disputed also between Mexico and Brazil, and Mexico and Argentina, despite depending on the product. So these countries are part of the regional market and they dispute this market. So this is a reality. This is a fact. Of course, they are very different countries. Of course, Mexico has a very large scale connected with the United States, but in the rest of the countries and in the rest of the region, they are under similar rules of competition. And on the other hand, on the comparison of the three countries, um, I think that we in the article also you were mentioning that the place of Slovakia and the place of Thailand are mainly decided by the headquarters office of the companies. I think we also said that in the article because the place of Thailand is also the first offshoring plants of the Japanese capitals that were very close to the market. And mainly the production of medium pickup trucks in Thailand started to be important because in Japan there wasn't market anymore for the pickup trucks. There wasn't an attractive model, an attractive product in Japan. So the concentration of all these products were part of the multinational companies' decisions, and they, of course, they were part. Of course, the geography and the closer relationship with Japanese capitals were part of it. But yeah, it's very difficult also in social sciences to know exactly which variable was the cause for it. And it was a combination of different variables. And I think that the product champion policy was an important policy and also had an important role in this process. But of course, the decision of the multinational companies too. So I think it's a combination of different variables, in my opinion.
Okay, maybe I just follow up. So, Tommaso, I agree with your point that you can create like specific markets if you are a developing country, but I would tend to like again like relate this to Peter's chapter that this is mostly like a thing that the really huge developing countries can do, but not something that I don't know, South Africa or Vietnam or Thailand or other countries can do, right? And I remember there's a really good paper from Anthony da Costa who showed this for India that they specified what kind of car they wanted. And then they got rejected from 4 companies before Suzuki said, okay, we are going to build this car, right? And similar story with Volkswagen in China that the Chinese wanted other car makers to come to China and then they all said no, thank you. And then Volkswagen took the risk and make it work. So there's definitely always this dynamic between the government and the companies who take a chance on the market. But to what extent you can really like create specific models and build an industry around them if you're a developing country is I would be very skeptical to generalize the China and India lesson to other countries. Like I think they have scale that no other countries have. Even if they are poor, they had enough scale to support a certain industry. And then for your second point, I fully agree that if you then can make this transition like China is doing now, that yeah, you create a new technology and you set a new standard, you can compete with standards, right? The Chinese were not able to compete with Euro emission or Euro fuel standards and so on, right? It's all copied from Europe if you are in Southeast Asia. But I think with EVs, we see that the Chinese start to formulate their own standards, and they basically use them as a way to compete already. And so I fully agree. But which one is national champion, which one is technology champion, which one comes first is pretty difficult, I think. Like there's too much dynamic in play, I think. And again, the irony is that the Chinese SOEs are doing not very well, but the Chinese private car makers are the ones that are successful, that create more attractive models and that go out, that are more aggressive. So I think this is really like interesting but very complicated story that I think we can continue to work on.
Yeah, Lorenza, I'll keep it very short because I think we should
Sure.
wrap up, right?
Yes, and Alexandre, and then we conclude.
Yeah, no, I just thank you, Tommaso. I think this is a great comment, and I mean, we are also, when we were writing the paper, we are also torn. It's not like we and I came out today a little bit forceful because I am really torn on the case. I think if you look at the industrial policy that Thailand has implemented, is quite impressive, and that I think is also evidence that this played a significant role. On the other hand, I mean, I would never understate the role of the strategies of the OEMs because at the end of the day, they decide what's going on. So I'm in full agreement there, and I think that is factor number one. The only things one could say against that argument is maybe that it was not only Toyota in Thailand, but yes, it was Japanese OEMs, but it was also Isuzu, it was also Mitsubishi, it was also Nissan, and it was also Ford that made the Ranger and scaled up the Ranger in Thailand and made it its biggest production location until South Africa actually managed to attract that investment by Ford recently. But it's no surprise that it was Ford that was scaled up in South Africa because Thailand had the lowest production comparatively. And South Africa already had an engine planned for the Ford Ranger, which it could then scale up in response to the scale up for the vehicle assembly scale up. So yeah, when you drill down to it, the story gets much more complex than three factors. But I think that Thailand did really well, and I think maybe the best way to put it is to say that industrial policy should go with the flow of what is going on, and then you can still influence things. But if you're just coming around as country X now and say, we want this type of vehicle, and that's what we're going to do, I mean, this is going to fail. So you need to move with what is actually going on in your space. But then there's still, I think, actual space to implement policies and to do better choices than worse choices. But yeah, interesting discussion. Thank you for the comments.
Alexandre.
No, just a brief comment on a question that someone put in the chat about when possibly subsidizing demand can work and when it doesn't work, right? I mean, I have many examples in the history that this kind of policy worked very well, like South Korea, for instance, in different ways. In other cases, like in Latin America, in Brazil, for instance, where things didn't work. And I think it boils down to the political aspect of industrial policy, in particular state capacities. So you can support different private companies, for instance, subsidizing the local demand, as long as they deliver something to the state. It could be either production or particular technological upgrading that requires the state to impose conditionalities or discipline on those private companies. And many countries try to do that, but of course it's a political aspect. So it depends on the local political economy. That's of course very hard, if not impossible, to replicate. Because if you don't have the particular political settlement, so to speak, in a certain context, you'll not be able to do that when you get captured by private interests. So, and before doing this kind of policies, most countries should ask whether they can or they have the political capabilities to discipline or impose conditionalities on those companies. Otherwise, they are bound to fail. So I think that's the political aspect behind industrial policy. So that's the only point I'd like to make. Thank you.
Okay. Peter.
Just a very brief comment. I think I agree with all of this, and I think it is very dangerous to try to sometimes generalize some ideal model of development that countries can or should follow. 2 years ago, I reviewed a book on the case of Hyundai of South Korea, and it was written by South Koreans. It's great, it's interesting, but my conclusion was that basically the model of development of Hyundai and the automotive industry in South Korea is so much embedded in South Korean culture and society, which is so unique that it is basically impossible to replicate it anywhere in the world. And I know, for example, that Iranians have been looking at South Korea as a model how to develop their automotive industry, but of course it did not work because the Iranian culture, business culture, and overall economy is so much different that it's very difficult to replicate. And one last comment about Slovakia, because Tommaso mentioned Slovakia, how successful it has been. Yes, it has been very successful for, I think, 2 reasons. One, it basically allowed transnational corporations, automakers, what some people call the corporate capture of the government by the interest of TNCs. So there was one reason Slovakia basically offered anything they could dream of in order to beat other competitors from Eastern Europe that were competing for large investments. That's one thing. And the other one was that in the early 2000s, when Slovakia basically, or the East European automotive industry was very rapidly developing, Slovakia had by far the lowest wages in Eastern Europe. So, in other words, it offered the opportunity for higher rates of profit, and it also had very high unemployment rate, close to 20%. So there was labor force available to work for these low wages, and that was the basis for, I think, Slovak success. So there was basically no government policy other than very aggressive system of investment incentives. You may argue that this has been successful in terms of Slovakia producing now 1 million cars per year, of course, but you may also ask at what cost it has been achieved, right? The highest degree of foreign control of the Slovak industry, automotive industry in Europe, and maybe around the world. The future of the industry is not at all in the hands of the Slovak government. And I've done a lot of work on Slovakia. There are hardly any local companies. Spillovers basically are non-existent to the Slovak economy. And during the years when Slovakia was paying huge investment incentives to Kia and maybe other large automotive companies, they had to cut funding for Slovak basic research in half because they didn't have enough money to support basically local capabilities. So yes, it's been very successful if measured by the number of vehicles they make, but you might question long-term consequences of this success for Slovakia, whether this is really the best thing to consider high dependence on the auto industry, which Boleslav very nicely showed in his yesterday's presentation, which of course is also economically quite dangerous. Thank you for organizing all of this. I have to say one more thing. I have put in the chat link to my book, which was published last year by Cambridge University Press. It's about the European auto industry, and it was published open access, so anyone can download it for free. So just in case you are interested in the European auto industry, you may check it out. And I've been also trying in that book think more conceptually and theoretically about the auto industry and its effect on economic development. And more generally, there are chapters on the effects of FDI, foreign direct investment, in less developed countries and regions. So I think it is very much directly related to some of the debates we have been having here. So thank you.
I'll say a few words to conclude. So first of all, thank you very much, Peter, for sharing your book and for participating in ours. We feel very proud and honored that you fueled so many discussions. So second point is I am sorry if with my question on product champion, I also contributed to this wrong idea that we wanted to generalize any conclusion, in a sense that, I mean, our book per se was exactly aimed at showing why paths can be different and outcomes can be relative. And obviously, as political economists, we start from the assumption that reality is not easy to replicate. But at the same time, I wanted to highlight the value of this dialectic between empirical research and deriving theoretical conclusions. It is not something that we always do, and it's not easy to do when we have such a variety of experiences, but I think it's an effort that is worth doing and we can continue. And I was just to share some conclusions. This to say, thank you very much, Gerpisa, for giving us the opportunity to have these in-depth conversations. I mean, condensing such a book in a book launch is complicated, so this double session was a brilliant opportunity. Grazie Tommaso for having had this idea of the double session. Thank you thank you to those who presented and to all the other contributors that still attended the sessions and participated, even those that couldn't come. We're very proud. I must say that attending these presentations strengthened my perception that what we did was worth, and that it's very nice that we got to the conclusion. It took us a long time, but it makes me feel, and I imagine Martin too, very proud of what we did. And last thought is, despite many universities and many disciplines today don't value books, I think it's very nice to feel that books can not only be the outcome of collaborations, but can also be, like in this case, if they're well integrated, can be the base for discussion. So it's an outcome, but it's also a starting point for new discussions and new reflections. So I hope you appreciate this. I did, even though our universities don't consider books, but I think they still have a value. And with this, I thank you very much again. I don't know if Martin wants to say anything else, but again, thank you for attending and participating.
Okay, then just very short. I just can echo Lorenza, was really great to work with everyone. It was really meaningful to have people from around the world to study the same industry, to have people who have done this for their entire career and people who are new to this, all on the same project. It was really great. And well, I hope that we can continue in Gerpisa to collaborate in this way. And actually, we are thinking about like continuing the working groups. But when we have a call, we will send out the call, and we hope to see many of you again, I would say. And of course, we hope to see many of you in Paris in summer.
I hope too. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Lorenza, Martin. It was a great double session.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye bye. It was great.
Bye bye.